Hey, speaking of that outside noise, Sophie, your teammate, Sophie came out with
Oh, thank you. Happy day.
Wow. I was going to bet all the money in the world that it was this old gal right here on the left that follows everybody around that shut this thing down. You created another controversy. Yeah, shutting down this press conference because Outkick was not your chosen approved WNBA media. You just created another controversy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would say that I'm educated enough from a scientific standpoint.
Not sure what education has to do with this, to be honest. Not sure what education has to do with it.
It is absolutely getting out of control. It's getting out of control now. Portland Fire head coach Alex Sarama is under fire. Stephanie White is being heavily criticized as well for their comments in regards to men. People who are born as men that transition being able to play in a women's league. Okay. And these coaches are trying to tiptoe around it.
Stephanie White got asked a simple question about her own player, and instead of answering it, she got up and left the room, leaving Sophie Cunningham to deal with the fallout completely alone.
Coach, there was a rally before the game, an anti-trans rally before the game, inspired by Sophie Cunningham. As a member of the LGBTQ plus community, how did you receive her comments and the way it ignited the right-wing and anti-trans supporters? And for the players, have you had conversations in the locker room about it?
I'll jump in on that. We do have an organizational statement. I'll read. So neither our organization nor Sophie had any knowledge of this demonstration and no contact with its organizers. Our only goal as a team, whether at home or away, is to win basketball games and make Fever fans for life, and we're united on that mission. Do you have more basketball questions?
That's not an exaggeration. That's literally what happened. A reporter asked Stephanie White directly about Sophie Cunningham's comments on protecting women's sports, the same comments that had already turned into a national story. And instead of giving any kind of answer, White stood up, said something short about being done for the day, and walked straight out of the room while cameras were still rolling.
I was going to bet all the money in the world that it was this old gal right here on the left that follows everybody around that shut this thing down. You created another controversy. Yeah, shutting down this press conference because Outkick was not your chosen approved WNBA media. You just created another controversy. Unbelievable. Do you want to grow this sport or not? Because if you do, you're going to have to let outlets like Outkick, oh my God, that are owned by Fox News, actually ask questions if you want.
You'd think a head coach would want to defend her own player, especially a player who's been one of the most productive bench pieces on the entire roster this season. Instead, Indiana's coach chose silence and then chose to physically remove herself from the situation rather than say a single sentence in support of Sophie. That's not what leadership is supposed to look like, and fans noticed immediately because this wasn't some throwaway question buried at the end of a routine presser. It came right in the middle of a week where Sophie's name was already everywhere.
What's your stance? What is your stance on men or athletes who test as biological male participating in women's sports? What's your personal stance?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would say that I'm educated enough from a scientific standpoint. I don't ever believe that exclusion is an answer. I just don't. I do think, when we think about various levels of sport, various governing bodies of sport and things that go into that, like I said, I'm not educated enough at the different levels. I know growing up, I played with the boys all the time.
So
there were girl sports.
Would you welcome a biological male in WNBA?
Again, it's like, I don't know. When we talk about biological male and scientifically where we are, I think it's a totally different scenario. As I said, I'm not educated enough in terms of transgender and transitioning to give you a smart answer. I would say though that I just don't feel like exclusion is an answer, and I think that we need to have deeper, more layered conversation.
The question itself wasn't complicated. A reporter simply asked Stephanie White what she thought about Sophie's comments regarding fairness in women's sports, comments Sophie had already stood behind twice in previous interviews without backing down. It wasn't a trick question. It wasn't designed to embarrass anybody. It was the most basic thing a reporter could ask a coach about a player who'd been front and center in the news all week, and any coach with a working relationship with her locker room should have had an answer ready.
Nothing about reading a smart answer. It's literally a yes or no question. So you give a yes or no answer. It's not hard. This is the issue. We're overcomplicating some of the most simple, basic life fundamentals when we have this conversation. And you just see Stephanie White sweating. You see her squirming. You know internally her clock sped up. Yeah. Stephanie White, just a whole lot of word salad right there.
And White had every opportunity to give a safe, boring, coach speak answer. She could have said something like, "I support all my players and their right to speak," and moved on with her day. Nobody would have blinked twice at that. Instead, she froze up, gave a clipped non-answer, and then walked away from the podium entirely, leaving the room half confused and half annoyed at what they just watched unfold in real time.
On that same vein, investor of ESPN, you talked about wanting to protect young girls who shouldn't have to go against biological men. Just can you expand your viewpoint on that?
I mean, I think I said what I said. I think it's kind of common sense. And I think I'll always believe in that. I think it's really important to protect children. And that's little girls who are also involved in that category. And so I stand on what I said, and I always believe that. You know, I don't know. I'm not a very political person, but I do have beliefs. I have morals, and I'll always stand on those and be true to who I am. And I think people are going to take it how they want to take it, but I've never even really said anything about that. And so when it comes just to protecting young girls in sport and women in sport, I feel very strongly about that. I think that's why you have Title IX. That's why you have some of the greats in women's sports. If Title IX and women's sports were protected, then you wouldn't hear about any type of women in sport. And so I think in the future, it's just really important to protect. You know, like I said, I extend love, and I don't dislike anyone. Like, I think there's room for absolutely everyone here, and I think there's room to love everyone. And I truly think when you get people in the same room, you have conversations, you actually have a lot in common with a lot of people. And so I'm there to love, but I'm also there to love biological women, and I think that there are rights that need to be protected. And like I said, I'm going to stand true to that. I'll never falter in my beliefs in that, but I have never once said I hated the trans community. Like I said, I think there's space for everyone.
Sophie Cunningham didn't call anyone out by name. She didn't attack a teammate or a rival player. A reporter asked her a direct question during a profile piece, and she gave a direct answer, saying she wants to protect the integrity of women's sports and make sure competition stays fair for the athletes it was built for. That's the entire controversy. Nothing hateful, nothing reckless, just an athlete saying what a lot of fans already quietly believe.
She said it's part of a growing league, but we have to be able to insulate. So are you not welcoming people into your league that have differing views? Point of fact, this coach herself came out and said, "No, I don't want you as coach." By the way, you can tell. You notice she hasn't come out and said, "If you're not in blah, 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 I don't think exclusion's the answer." But she's not pushing fans away anymore either, which I think is rather interesting. I'm not giving her any credit at all, because what do you mean by science? He asked you point blank, biological males should be allowed in the WNBA, yes or no? You gave a bullshit coward answer.
There's something about watching a grown adult, a head coach with a national platform, physically leave a room rather than say one supportive sentence about her own player that just doesn't sit right with people. It's not a good look for her, and it's an even worse look for the organization she represents. Coaches get asked uncomfortable questions all the time. Walking out isn't how professionals handle that. Here's the part that makes this whole thing sting even more. This wasn't the first chance the Fever organization had to stand behind one of its own players this season. Caitlin Clark's dealt with her own version of being picked apart by media and rival players all year, ever since she stepped into the league as a rookie, and the front office has been noticeably quiet on defending her too whenever things got uncomfortable.
I just don't understand why Sophie Cunningham keeps getting crap. I mean, here's the thing. Like, I get it. It's over politics and whatnot. But here's my problem with sports now, is I remember there was a time where everyone agreed, regardless if you were one side or the other, we're going to watch sports that just completely ignore politics and get away from it. To put aside our differences and just be honestly civilized with one another. Because I can say from experience, I have different beliefs than probably a lot of people, a lot of you guys who are watching. But that doesn't matter because I still love all people and I value everyone's opinions. as we all should, but honestly, that's just not how today's day and age works. So there's that. But also, I don't think, we harp on people for voicing an opinion opposite to ours if they're a celebrity, but then if they voice the same opinion as us and they're a celebrity, we don't say anything. I mean, I can say certainly if any celebrity says something that I don't agree with, I'm not really going to care, because the fact of the matter is, their opinion isn't any more valid than ours.
So when Sophie needed the same kind of backing, the pattern just repeated itself. Once could be an accident. Twice starts looking like an actual habit. And fans who've been paying attention to how this front office handles controversy are running out of patience with the excuses. You can only chalk up so many no-comment moments to coincidence before people start asking whether this coaching staff actually has their players' backs at all, or whether they'd rather just wait for stories to blow over on their own.
Even Stephanie White, she says she's not educated enough on it. She kind of tried to stay away from it. And now she's getting blasted for it. And you are putting coaches in a situation, you got to understand, this is nasty. These are people, they're here to coach basketball. And they're not going to risk losing their jobs to get in front of a podium and say, yo, I don't think men should be playing against women. I don't think men should be playing in a women's league. They're not going to say that. And they are now being put in a situation to where anything they say is not good enough if they don't say they believe that men should be able to play in a woman's league. If they don't say that, it's a problem. And this is just getting out of control. We got to get into what they had to say. Welcome to Keep the Vision. Make sure you...
And that's the real issue here. Not just one bad press conference moment. It's a coach who keeps choosing silence over support whenever a player says something that might stir up the media, even when that player didn't do anything wrong in the first place. Sophie didn't insult anyone. She didn't call out a teammate. She answered a question honestly when asked, and she's now the one paying the price for it while her own coach won't even say her name out loud in a supportive sentence. That's a strange way to run a locker room built around loyalty. It gets worse when you look at what happened to Sophie's playing time in the days right after her comments blew up. Indiana lost at home not long after the interview aired, and Sophie took the blame afterward in typical fashion, saying she'd own it, being the accountable teammate she's always been in these moments. But fans watching closely noticed her minutes were down. Not slightly down, noticeably down, to the point where people were asking in real time during the broadcast where she was and why she wasn't out there in a close game. That wasn't a one-game blip either. Across her most recent stretch, Sophie's minutes dropped to a number that's noticeably low for a rotation piece who'd been one of the more consistent scoring threats off Indiana's bench all season. This is a player who dropped 33 points across a single back-to-back stretch just weeks earlier, looking like one of the best role players in the league. Players performing at that level don't usually see their role shrink for no basketball reason. So when it happens right after a national media firestorm, people are going to notice and start connecting dots.
Sophie Cunningham has been fearless throughout this whole entire thing. She made her comments, then she was pressured into walking it back. That's what that secondary interview was by James Freud Boyd, was pretty much saying, here, Sophie, this is your chance to walk it back and get into everybody's good graces again. And Sophie said, no, that's not what I said. And then Sophie reached out to those two teenagers that was at the game saying, hey, I got something coming for you guys. You guys are doing heroes work, coming to these games, speaking up, showing your integrity, showing your courage, showing what you stand for. While Stephanie White throwing a whole generation under the bus.
When reporters actually asked Stephanie White directly about the sudden dip in Sophie's playing time, the answers got vague fast. No clear injury explanation, no clean basketball reasoning about tough matchups or defensive schemes forcing a change, just the usual coach speak about managing the group and doing what's best for the team. The kind of answer that technically says something while explaining nothing at all. Maybe that really is all it is. Coaches manage rotations constantly, and sometimes a dip in minutes genuinely is nothing more than fatigue or load management. But the timing here is exactly what keeps making fans uneasy every time they think about it. Then things got worse on the court itself. During Indiana's next home game, Sophie got booed by a section of fans the moment she checked in. An ugly moment that should have drawn some kind of response from the organization sitting right there on the bench.
This is Portland booing Sophie. They booed Sophie Cunningham.
Nobody stepped in, Not the coaching staff, not the front office, not a single teammate speaking up publicly afterward to shut that down. Sophie stood out there and took it, the same way she's taken every other hit this month, quietly and without complaint. Because that's who she's always been on that roster. She's never been the type to let anyone script what she says or how she plays, and she's never once apologized afterward for having a backbone. Think about what that actually looks like from the outside. A player says something calm and reasonable when a reporter asks her a direct question, gets dragged through headlines calling her divisive and reckless for it, gets her playing time quietly trimmed the same week the story breaks, and then gets booed in her own home arena while the people who are supposed to have her back say absolutely nothing. That's not a coincidence stacking up on its own. That's a pattern, and it's one that's been building for weeks, not something that happened overnight in one bad news cycle. People forget how much weight one athlete can end up carrying when a story like this snowballs the way this one has. Sophie didn't ask to become the center of a national conversation about women's sports. She answered a question honestly, stood behind her answer twice more when reporters pushed her on it, expecting her to soften it into something safer, and she held her ground without flinching both times. Then she watched her own organization treat her like a liability ever since.
What resources does the league provide for you guys as players to kind of help you try to filter through some of the hate and negative things that come through on social media?
I think that honestly, I don't know what our league does to help with that. If they really do anything, you can put out statements as much as you want, but at the end of the day, you're in an entertainment business. That's when mental toughness comes in. If you're going to live by praise, you're going to die by the hate. And so I think that's on the individual person to have mental toughness. Some people can deal with it, some people can't. And I think you can see the ones who can. And unfortunately, there are some who can't. And it's not beneficial to them. But you can't control what other people say or what other people do. All you can do is control yourself, how you treat people. Speak up, and support people who, maybe don't have a voice or don't have the courage to do that. But it's one of those things. You're in the entertainment business and you have to expect it.
That's a lot for anyone to carry, let alone someone who's still expected to show up every single night and perform at a high level in front of a crowd that includes people booing her for something she said off the court entirely. Sophie's minutes have been down, her name's been dragged through headline after headline, written by people who barely covered her before this month, and the one person whose job it literally is to defend her in front of cameras chose to walk out of a room instead of saying anything at all. That's a rough spot to be in, no matter how thick your skin is. And through all of it, Sophie hasn't lashed out at anybody. She hasn't gone on a rant. She hasn't called out her coach publicly. She hasn't demanded anything from the front office in front of cameras. She's just kept showing up, kept playing through it, and kept answering questions honestly, even when the easier thing would have been to give some safe, forgettable non-answer like the one her own coach gave when it mattered most. That contrast alone tells you a lot about who's actually handling this situation with class.
Outside the Moda Center Friday, Sophie Cunningham was the literal poster child for separate sex sports. The Indiana Fever Guard growing more outspoken on her desire to keep transgender athletes from competing in girls and women's sports. Before the Portland Fire's game against the Fever, several people who support Cunningham gathered outside the arena to rally. Counter-demonstrators were also there to support the trans community.
Fans have noticed that contrast too. Scroll through any comment section under a clip of Sophie playing, and you'll find people defending her far more than criticizing her, which tells you the boos in the arena aren't necessarily representative of how most fans actually feel about her. A vocal minority making noise in a stadium doesn't always match what's happening online, where support for her has honestly been pretty steady since this whole thing started. At some point, you have to ask what message Stephanie White walking out actually sends to the rest of that locker room. If speaking honestly, calmly, and without attacking a single person gets you a boo-worthy reputation in the media and radio silence from your own coach, why would any other player on that roster feel safe doing the same thing the next time a reporter asks them something uncomfortable? That's not a small question either. That's the kind of thing that shapes how an entire team operates behind closed doors for years. Coaches are supposed to be the buffer between players and the outside noise, not another source of it. And right now, based on everything that's played out over the last few weeks, Sophie Cunningham isn't getting that buffer from anybody in Indiana's organization. She's getting booed at home, benched in close games, ignored by her own coach in front of cameras, and somehow still showing up every night with the same energy she's always played with. If anything, that says more about her character than it does about anyone else involved in this mess.
Well, the Sophie Cunningham saga continues. Pro-women activists are set to rally at this weekend's WNBA games in key Democratic strongholds like Portland and Minneapolis to show their support for Cunningham. after the Indiana Fever player spoke out against biological males competing in women's sports. They're calling it Sophie Night. This comes after a chaotic and frankly horrific incident this week where two teenage girls, fans of Cunningham, went to the Seattle Storm game versus the Fever and said that co-owner Celeste Keaton cursed at them, yelled at them, berated them for daring to wear pro-women's sports gear. By the way, just XX and XY t-shirts. One of the teens is now speaking out about the exchange that made her cry. What?
We were shocked. Yeah, it's disappointing though, too, because she's also a woman and she just kind of cussed out two 16-year-olds that were just trying to have fun. We weren't trying to be political, we were just trying to support Sophie.
Now, Keaton has been fined and suspended from attending the team's next 5 home games, but has yet to issue an apology. We've reached out to her for a statement and have not heard back. Meanwhile, the Seattle Storm says this, quote, "We respect the league's decision to fine and suspend her. We remain committed to creating a welcoming and respectful environment for anyone who attends a Storm game."
Nobody's saying Stephanie White owes Sophie a passionate speech defending every word she said. But walking out of a room, rather than saying literally anything at all, is its own kind of statement, whether White meant it that way or not. Fans caught it immediately, clipped it, and it's now everywhere. And it's going to keep following both of them until somebody in that building actually addresses it directly instead of walking away from the question one more time. Silence stopped being neutral the moment cameras caught someone physically leaving to avoid it. If Indiana wants this story to actually go away, the fix is simple enough. Somebody in that organization needs to stand up in front of a camera and say something supportive about Sophie Cunningham. Not vague, not rushed, not another walkout moment for people to clip and share. Until that happens, every empty non-answer and every quiet minute cut from her rotation is just going to keep getting measured against the week her own coach couldn't even stay in the room long enough to answer a basic question about her. Because here's the thing that gets lost in all the headlines. Sophie Cunningham isn't asking for special treatment or a pass on accountability. She's asking to be heard the same way anyone else on that roster gets heard. And to still get to play the game she's clearly earned her spot in afterward. Right now, based on everything fans have watched unfold this past month, it doesn't look like she's getting either one of those things, and until Indiana's coaching staff actually addresses that directly, this story isn't going anywhere.